Oh, hello, Wisecrack. Welcome to Show Me the Meaning, the Wisecrack movie podcast. I am Michael, and today I am joined by Austin and Tommy.
What up?
Thank you.
Yeah, so great to have everyone here. So this is a fun one because we are talking about a movie that was voted on a Patreon poll. So if you participated in that, we love you. If you didn't, jump in next time. So we're talking about the Coen brothers' 2009 film, A Serious Man, with one caveat. Technically, that didn't win the poll.
No way.
Yes, we got excited. We saw the poll early. Polls were not closed. It's like when they call an election and then someone gets on the news and they're like, actually, Gail. But so the real winner was 1917, which we will be talking about next week. So we're doing them just in a different order. So before we get into it, what are everyone's first impressions on recently viewing or reviewing A Serious Man?
Tommy, jump in there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for myself, I guess when I first saw this movie, I didn't really quite know what I was getting into. Usually the Coens are sort of in two different modes, typically. There's like drama Coens, the Fargos mode, No Country for Old Men, that kind of mode. And then there's like their more bizarre and sort of playful comedy side, sort of The Big Lebowski and in those type of movies, Raising Arizona, for instance. And so for A Serious Man, when I started watching, usually when I go into a Coen Brother movie, I know what I'm going to get. I know what I'm going into. And I remember going into A Serious Man opening night and the whole audience there, and then the parable started. And you could just hear like the collective sigh of, what the hell are we watching here? and I don't think that feeling ever went away because the movie is so sort of tonally strange.
Yeah.
And revisiting it again, I was just sort of struck by just how strange the movie is and how mean-spirited it is. And I kind of love it. It feels like its own thing within the Coen brothers sort of filmography, and I kind of dig this. I really love this movie, actually.
That's great.
Yeah.
Before we get your thoughts, Austin, I just want to note, I liked your point that it's kind of different tonally from other Coen brothers films, because even the actors they use, the Coen brothers are kind of famous for using a lot of the same people. Not a lot of repeat offenders here. Austin, what do you think about A Serious Man?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I saw it was right in the throngs of like my religious studies. I was studying theology when the film came out, and so I had heard that this was an intentional retread of Job, and Job is one of my favorite poems in the Jewish Old Testament, or the Jewish Bible, I should say, the Christian Old Testament. And so I was really excited to kind of go in and see what this modern retelling of Job was all about. And so I loved it when I first saw it because I thought it was a very clever and subdued way of talking about loss and tragedy and uncertainty and maybe absurdity. And then rather than being so, like, it isn't like over the top, right? Like, it isn't like, oh, woe is me, everything is crazy, my world is falling apart. It's like this very subtle form of tragedy, but it's also set within suburban middle-class America, which I am from the suburbs. So very different suburbs, but I kind of get the suburban malaise and things like that. So I found intellectually quite stimulating, personally quite stimulating, and then I think socially I thought it was really cool. And then watching it last night, I think I was focusing on the themes because I was preparing to try to like suck out whatever meaning there was that we could, so we could talk about it on the cast. But I was more interested in like the formal and aesthetic elements, the acting, Deacon's cinematography, which I think is really understated in this film, but it's beautiful. The color palette, I think, is fantastic. The neighborhood in which they shot it is perfect. It kind of reminds me of a real-life Edward Scissorhands. Remember The Suburbs and Edward Scissorhands? I mean, that's like super pastel-y, and obviously that's
I think it's
intentional.
Bloomington, Minnesota? Or no. Oh, this is going to kill me. It's wherever the famous hospital is in Minnesota. Is it like the Mayo Clinic?
And they did some filming at St. Olaf.
Rochester.
Didn't you do some work at St. Olaf back in the day, brother?
Yeah, they filmed the scene with the big blackboard when he's talking about the cat in the box. I've seen that classroom in real life before. It was a a pilgrimage of sorts.
Yeah. So anyway, all that to say, I think it's a really interesting film. I don't know if I would say it's a great film, but in their filmography, I find it to be very unique and something worthy of attention. And it's one of those things that actually I enjoyed it more this time than I've seen it like 4 or 5 times now. But I think I really enjoyed it this time, oddly enough.
Wow.
Maybe it's because I've just become a little bit desensitized to the just unceasing like tragedy, that I kind of was able to enjoy the humor and the subtlety and kind of the dark absurdity a little bit more this time around.
Wow, both of your takes are so good. I'll only say this in terms of first impressions. I've long thought, I still think it's the conceptual masterpiece of the Coen brothers filmography. I think in terms of getting at a position on philosophy, on meaning, on religion, I think they take a lot of these ideas they explore in minimal ways throughout their other films, and they cram it all together right here, which makes it a dense film and a film that can be kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
It's not a film that makes me feel particularly good, but it's a film that I love. So before we go further, let me just give a quick summary, just in case anyone hasn't seen it in a while, or you've never seen it and you're not going to see it, but you still want to hang out. I want you to feel included. So here's the film. It opens with a Jewish parable from the old country that's maybe connected to the film, maybe isn't, probably is not. And then we cut to the inside of a young man's ear as he listens to the Jefferson Airplane during Hebrew class. He makes a weak attempt to pay drug dealer Mike Fagel for some weed, but gets his ancient iPod-looking thing and $20 confiscated. He's now on Fagel's shit list. At the same time, his father is getting his annual physical and x-ray with a doctor so careful he makes sure to offer him a cigarette at the end. We cut to the class, and we see our protagonist, Larry Gopnik, teaching physics and dealing with Clive, a South Korean student who finds his poor grade to be unjust and tries to bribe Larry with a fat stack of cash. We then hear the voice of his soon-to-be nemesis, Cy Abelman, for the first time. If you've seen this movie, you know the name Cy Abelman. Cy then demands that Larry get a ritual Jewish divorce so that he can steal his wife in the properly religious fashion. Cy later shows up to Larry's house with a bottle of wine, and he insists that Larry let it breathe for 10 minutes. Oh, and Larry also has a brother with a disgusting cyst who drinks orange juice out of the fridge like a monster and is working on his own probability map of the universe called the Metaculus. Now, Larry soon finds out from the chair of his department, because he's a physics professor, that he's been receiving eloquently written letters from someone who thinks Larry isn't morally suited for tenure. And his goy neighbor is annexing part of Larry's yard to build a boat shed. The tension builds. In a moment where he's feeling very stressed, doesn't know why this is all is happening in his life, he gets the advice to seek out advice from rabbis. So we see him go on a quest and talks to 3 different rabbis and tries to talk to 3, talks to 2, gets life-changing advice like change your perspective, look at the parking lot, and here's a weird story about a goy's teeth that ultimately means nothing. We then get a cosmic coincidence, double car crash, Larry rear-ends someone, and Cy Abelman dies. And Larry ends up paying for the funeral of the man that was mid-stealing his wife. Yikes. After the funeral, things get worse. The cops show up to warn them that Uncle Arthur, Larry's brother, is gambling. It gets worse than gambling, folks. Then Larry has a pretty rad hang session with his neighbor, Miss Samsky, where they drink iced tea, smoke weed, and vibe out to some psychedelic tunes. But the vibe is broken by Uncle Arthur when the cops show up and arrest him for solicitation and sodomy in North Dakota. We finally get a glimpse of the famed Rabbi Marshak, but he's busy thinking and won't talk to Larry. Cut to a thank God it's a dream sequence where Larry tries to help his brother escape to Canada and they're hunted by their goy neighbors. He wakes up and finally it's the day of Danny's bar mitzvah. And Danny is ripped off the marijuana, but somehow manages to get through his Torah portion with the help of a rabbi. He then gets a one-on-one with the famed Rabbi Marshak, and his life-changing wisdom is some song lyrics and the command to be a good boy. Things are going pretty good. Larry gets a heads up that he's going to get tenure, and Danny gets his ancient iPod back, so it seems like everything is good. But then Larry gets a $3,000 lawyer bill. He changes Clive's failing grade to use his bribe money to cover it. The second he changes the grade, the phone rings. It's his doctor. He wants to talk about his chest x-ray. He needs to be there in person. We assume it's cancer. Meanwhile, at Danny's school, a tornado is on the way. The kids get stuck outside on their way to the basement of the synagogue. Presumably, Larry is going to die, and Danny and his classmates probably die too. The end. That's the film. Now, I'm excited to get into this feel-good story. But before we do, we're going to talk about something that actually makes me feel good. That we have sponsors for this podcast that enable us to do this, and we're excited about them. And I want to tell you about them. So first, I don't know if either of you, Austin and Tommy, are trying to make 2020 a year to remember, where you learn some new things.
I mean, who isn't?
Exactly. Well, we're still in January, so I think we're still giving ourselves that mulligan month of like, as long as we do a new habit by the end of January, it's real.
Yep. There's always time.
Always time. And this is why I think Skillshare is awesome. It's an online learning community where millions of curious minds come together to continue their own creative journeys. With thousands of classes and topics ranging from graphic design to photography to web development to crafts. I don't know if we have physics. I can check. Because I am trying to really work on being a better writer in 2020. Writing more. I know it's something all of us do.
Ditto.
I'm checking out this course called Creative Writing for All, a 10-day journaling challenge by Emily Gould, a writer that I've loved for years, and she's a good Twitter follow. And it's cool. Like, journaling might not sound like a hip or cool thing, but it's a way of just getting you to write a little bit every day and get those juices flowing. Now, one of the best parts about Skillshare is that it's really affordable, especially compared to taking a class in person. You can get an annual subscription for less than $10 a month, and you can get 2 months of free premium membership right now by going to Skillshare.com/Wisecrack. So guys, why not come along with me? Learn something new in 2020. It makes more sense than the gym membership you're going to use 3 times. And they won't let you out of the contract. And you're just going to feel bad about yourself. Even if you fail at this, no one will know. So go to Skillshare.com/Wisecrack today and start your free 2-month premium membership. Now, learning skills is good. You know what else I like? I like health. A theme of this movie is going to the doctor to get checked out. It's awkward for Larry. What if you didn't have to go to the doctor? What if you used Let's Get Checked, which is an accredited at-home testing service with the mission to make health screening open and patient-led. Now, there's some stuff that we go to the doctor for we feel comfortable with. Oh, I have a cold. My arm hurts. You know what I don't want to go to the doctor and say? I think I might have an STD. Now, many of them are asymptomatic, and 51% of people, that's more than half, don't get tested because they don't want to bring up sex or STDs with their healthcare provider. Okay, over 1 in 2 Americans will contract an STD at some point in their lifetimes. There's 3 of us on this podcast. Do the math. So, use Let's Get Checked. You can get tested for STDs. You can get tested for your testosterone levels. Maybe you're worried that you've been eating pizza and feeling bad, so you get your gluten allergy test. It's easy. You go online, order a kit. It's going to come in a discrete package. You activate it, follow the instructions. You send your sample back with a prepaid label, and they have a team of physicians that are going to review your results. Nursing team ready to talk to you about it. And if you need drugs, I hope you don't. I hope you're good. They'll set you up with that. And you can get your own Let's Get Checked kit today by using the link in the description of our show. When you use the promo code SHOWME at checkout, you will get 40% off your entire order. 40%. Okay? So I want you to go.
Legit.
I want you to go to Let's Get Checked. I want you to get involved. I want you to sign up for an account. I want you to use the code SHOWME. And I want you to be healthy. Is that okay that I want that for our listeners?
Be healthy.
Listen, it's important, okay? Now
I know I said that and it sounded sarcastic, but I'm serious. Be healthy.
Be healthy. Learn stuff with Skillshare. Get tested with Let's Get Checked. And now, back to a serious man. So, there's a lot to unpack here. Does anyone have something that they want to get started with?
I mean, you did say that you were unsure if the folklore or the folktale at the beginning relates to the rest of the film. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Let's start with that
a little bit. I mean, I think that it does absolutely connect to the rest of the film. I know that the Coen brothers, they wanted to attach some sort of Yiddish folktale to the film, and so they couldn't find one that fit, so they wrote their own, which I think is kind of rad. But yes. I think that the fact that the Rebbe, his picture is on the wall when Larry goes to try to talk to Marshak, if you look over his shoulder, there's a picture of the, how do you say it? Dybbuk?
The Dybbuk? Yeah.
The Dybbuk. That there's a picture of him over Larry's shoulder, which means that there's a type of lineage, obviously, in the Aaronic and Levitical priesthood. But so there's a type of tradition that's connected to and a type of history. And so I think that that's kind of an intentional way of connecting the history, if you will, of what we're seeing in A Serious Man in the late 60s to the kind of previous past folklores that have characterized or that have narrativized, if you will, the Jewish tradition. You know?
Yeah, no, I totally. For me, that prologue it definitely functions that way, and I never noticed the picture behind the person. But to me, it sort of thematically serves as sort of a parable for the film itself and what's to follow. So in this parable, you have these two people who are sort of confronted with someone who may be a Dabica spirit or who may not be. He may just be a rabbi. And so it's how do we perceive the events that happen to us? This guy, his husband, he's in a storm. His cart breaks. Oh my God, a miracle. There's this rabbi nearby. He saves me. The wife perceives it as, this horrific event. You have been visited by an evil spirit. It's how do we perceive the misfortune or the fortunes that happen around us. And to me, that's what the movie's about. And that's what this parable is sort of setting up for us.
I like it. I agree. But yeah, I think it relates in that general way. I think if you're looking for a sort of like one-to-one... and I think the first time I saw it, that was my sense. Because I think I not overestimated. I took it a little too literally and thought the Coens are showing me this because there's a secret. And I need to find the secret in the parable to make sense of the movie. I started to enjoy the parable more when I gave up that desire to make that connection.
It's funny you said it because I think the movie itself says that, where when he's telling the math problem for sort of Schrodinger's cat, and he uses the cat model, and he's like, this doesn't really explain the math 100%. The parable never really explains the actual fact. So I think that's leaning into the parable sort of serves the purpose of the thematic point, but it's hard to 100% sort of cement what the movie is trying to say.
Yeah, and I think maybe talking about the parable at the beginning gets us into one of the themes of the movie that we're going to talk about other ways. So let's just get it going, which is religion. I think in terms of a theme that's at least in the background of a lot of Coen Brothers films that have not religion explicitly, like morality in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the number one way people sort of perceive the world around them is oftentimes through religion. They turn to religion as a way to sort of define the events that befall them, and I think that is what the Coen Brothers are trying to do here.
Yeah, Austin, as a man who has studied religion I'm complimenting you. You don't have to take it. I was about to say, intro you as a man who has studied religion at multiple levels and all types of depth, and who thinks about this sort of stuff. What does this movie say to you? What do you take away from this movie and the way it sort of deals with theological issues?
I mean, textually, if you look at the story of Job, of which this is an intentional retread, there's a lot of discussion about the difference between the prologue in Job, which is prose, which is where God and Satan make the deal about whether or not they should test Job, and then the actual poem of the text itself. And the scholarly debate goes basically like this. We don't really know when it was written. It's potential that this is the most ancient of all of the Old Testament texts. It might also be kind of relatively new, but there's definitely agreement that the prologue, the prose prologue, where the deal is made, that is a later addition, but that still may have been like a perpetual itself kind of retreading of typical Jewish folklore. That there's this sense in which we don't know why tragedy befalls us. Maybe it's God testing us. Or, as some people will say who don't like the prose prologue, and they say, well, there's not a lot of value in it, they would say, actually, we don't know what's going on. That was just some later sort of scribes trying to justify suffering in the world, that it could be all for our sanctification or for our benefit or something like that. But that really we need to just throw our hands in the air and say, we have no fucking clue. And so I think that tension of, is there someone kind of are we puppets that are, living at the behest of this divine plan or some sort of gamble or whatever it is? Or is there just kind of cosmic absurdity and we don't really know? In the Jewish tradition, more so than definitely the Christian tradition, has really kind of, I think, done a great job of exploring that theme of uncertainty and absurdity. And that's why that's why I love the second rabbi who gives the tale about the goy's teeth.
Yeah.
And Larry's expecting this infinite wisdom, and he kind of is just like, yeah, that's the story. So you kind of get the prologue of the film, this Yiddish folk tale that it kind of doesn't really have any immediate connection, like you say. Like, it doesn't give you the answers to the later story. And then the rest of the film itself is kind of its own folk tale that doesn't really give you any answers. It kind of just leaves you asking more questions.
Well, yeah, and since
and
you
then
brought
even,
up
and then even like the supposed infinite wisdom of Marshak, the final rabbi that's supposed to be able, he's the one thinking and pondering. Even he's just like, be a good boy. You know,
well,
like,
yeah,
even
and
that.
Since you brought up the second rabbi, I do just want to jump in real quick, because there is that quote where Larry says to him, talking about God, why does he make us feel the questions if he's not going to give us any answers? So that idea too, that like he's basically saying, why has God imbued us with these desires of knowledge if we don't get the damn answers?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting. I love how he is a physicist and how for him mathematics is the answer, right? Like, he thinks that mathematics gives us the answer, but yet there is no algorithm, there is no equation that will allow him to input any variables to actually reach the divine, if you will, or to reach the absolute. Like, you're still stuck. Like, maybe the mentaculus, maybe you can devise something, but it's still never resolved.
Yeah, and that parallel, I think, is super interesting between religion and physics. Like, two explanatory systems that people use to explain everything, and kind of the two poles of sometimes the most obnoxious human behaviors, right? We either can be the type of person that like uses religion to explain everything in a way that maybe annoys people that are more obsessed with like rationality, and then there's the rationality bro who wants to explain everything in logical terms, and anything that's not logical doesn't make sense.
I mean, does the movie argue one way or the other? Like, how should Larry react in this situation?
Yeah.
Does he do anything wrong? Because he is punished in this movie.
He's punished so bad.
Hardcore.
Cy Abelman. Yeah, I mean, I think, and please, y'all interrupt me and jump in on this whenever you want, but I mean, I think eventually both fail. Like, physics and math don't help him at the end of the day.
No.
Religion doesn't help him at the end of the day. There's an absurdity to reality that neither of those systems, at least as he is looking into them, really account for. Or at least maybe on their own, math and Judaism will account for that sort of absurdity or meaninglessness, but he's not getting that. And I do think. Go ahead, Austin.
I was going to say, there is something amazing too in like the Kabbalistic tradition, and they kind of talk about it, right? Where like certain characters in Hebrew correspond to certain numbers, right? And so there is a sense in which like there is a mysteriousness maybe to even the language of mathematics that opens us up to more. And maybe that's kind of intentionally trying to say, hey, it isn't language and it isn't like faith and our regimes of meaning that will save us, but neither is it these hardcore numbers, but they point to each other, and then they ultimately stand there with their arms open and they say, well, we don't know.
Yeah, to me, this is a guy who thinks that if he does the right things, he's going to be rewarded for that, and so he's not rewarded for it, and he can't figure out what he's doing wrong. And I think the answer for me, at least, watching this movie, watching it again, the answer is there is no reason why anything bad happens to Larry. There is no answers to be found in this movie. The storm that happens at the end, it's going to happen anyway, even if he changes the grade or not. He's always going to be sick at the end, potentially going to die at the end of this movie. And questioning that doesn't do you any good. I mean, Larry is sort of a man of inaction in this movie. He doesn't do anything, and he's always having all these dreams about what he should be doing. He should be helping his brother go to Canada. He should be, screwing the neighbor. But then every time in his dream, he's sort of punished. He punishes himself for it. His Alan gets shot in the head. He gets boarded up in the dream when he's having sex with the neighbor. And so there's this thought of, I can't do these things because they're bad, they're wrong, or it'll cause destruction. But it doesn't matter because he doesn't do anything, and it causes his destruction anyway. So I guess it's a question of, how to be moral, or is it even worth being moral in a universe that is governed by sort of chaos and nothingness?
Yeah, 100%. I think that theme of inaction is so crucial. And I think that's, it's two different ways to think about religion in this film as it's interpreted. Is religion a set of systems that constrain behavior, or is it a way of belief that enables action, choice, subjectivity, and freedom. And he is clearly gone on the former side of that. And that's why, in a weird way, I think there's some wisdom to the second rabbi, Rabbi Nachner, who kind of comes off as an idiot in the context of the film. But like maybe on rewatch, he's smarter than we give him credit for.
It's almost like his inaction is caused by his sort of his religious background, that he doesn't think he can do these things because then he'll be punished by God.
Yeah. And that's why I think the parallel, you brought this up with the tornado at the end, is so important, because it's one movie if he changes Clive's grade and then immediately, presumably gets cancer or whatever. But Danny didn't really do anything. If anything, he passed his Torah portion like a good boy, and him and his friends, including famed drug dealer Mike Fagel, are about to get tornadoed up. and I think there's this interesting parallel too, where for Larry, Judaism is taken very seriously. He's pursuing rabbinic wisdom. Danny, on the other hand, how does he learn his Torah portion? He listens to a record. He doesn't learn how to read Hebrew. He performs the religious
and he smokes
act.
weed while he's actually while he's in his bar mitzvah.
Yeah, but for him, it's like a performative ritual that you got to do. Whereas for Larry, he's really looking to this to provide guidance for his life.
But he still thinks that he's going to be rewarded for being religious. Like he thinks that if he's if he does the right things, everything should come to him naturally. And so I think that's what sort of sets him off on sort of his existential crisis, is that he's like, I'm a serious man. I've done everything right. Why am I being punished by this God if I've done everything right?
Well, you know what's great in that speech? You know what he says? He starts to say, "I'm a serious man," and then he stops himself and he says, "I try to be a serious man." And I think that there's something so lovely about that effort, right? Like, can you do enough to earn the favor of God? Or does it not fucking matter? And this goes to the heart of one of the central concerns about like legalism and religion. Like, do you do things theurgically, where you do certain practices, like sacramental practices, so that you can please the gods and appease whatever the whims are, so that your crops will be bountiful, or so that you can get out of exile, for example, in ancient Jewish thought, right? And so it's what can you do in order to kind of please the gods? And then, of course, there are other people in the rabbinic tradition that are like, no, you misunderstand. It's not how you can earn it or appease the gods or kind of mitigate uncertainty. It's about kind of remaining faithful to the call, or to what is just, or to what is right, which is maybe more the existential kind of reading of it.
Yeah, that's legit. So let's, while we're kind of finishing up talking about religion and math stuff, let's talk about the Mentaculus. It's interesting. If you take that out of the movie, all the themes we're talking about still stand. But the fact that his clearly a little bit weird brother Arthur has this psychotic-looking notebook, to be blunt. Well, if I was sitting next to someone on like the bus and I saw them doing that, I'd be like, oh, I want to get off. But he has this thing called the Mentaculus, which does something because he wins money gambling, and he gives to Danny, that I'm sure Danny gives to another local narcotics dealer. But what do we think the Mentaculus means, or what are they trying to get us to think about with that?
I mean, isn't it like that like he's the holy fool? That he's the one who's like possessed, right, by some other type of spirit. He's the one who doesn't believe in like the mathematical rational algorithms of physics, but he also doesn't fit culturally in the world. He's kind of this outsider, right? And so his calculations, they might seem crazy from both of those poles, but Larry at least thinks, well, is there wisdom in this? Is there something in this? Is there a divine mystery here that I might be able to find the answers to? And then they never pursue it really. Like, they don't really like wrap it up, and you don't really know, like, was the Mentaculus just nonsense, or was it something that was useful, or like, how is this guy winning all this money gambling, and he loves cards, and his life falls apart when he is not able to do it anymore, and he gets in trouble and shit, and so we don't really know. But I feel like that's it, is that it's kind of like this foolishness, this holy foolishness that is beyond typical human comprehension.
Yeah, also I think like the Richard Kind character sort of serves as a nice sort of counterbalance to sort of Larry, the Michael Stuhlbarg character. Because I mean, Michael Stuhlbarg is constantly questioning, why is this all happening to me? All the worst things are happening. And then I think in the most sort of powerful and emotional scene, you have, the brother being like, I wish I had your life, basically. He tells him by the pool, you have it so much easier than I do. And I think that the perception of, trauma in your life and all the circumstances that befall you really plays into that sort of interaction.
Definitely. And I think there's that interesting scene where the Richard Kind character, Uncle Arthur, is by the lake. He's so excited about bottling air to make $1 million. And
That's right.
I love that too, how it just cuts from there too. He screams like, if someone could bottle this air, they'd make $1 million. And then just fade to black. I think we go to the rabbis at that point. But hearing Larry describe him to his friend with the leg braces, clearly a shout out to Forrest Gump. The Coen brothers famously said it's their favorite movie. Everything they do is an ode to. No, they've never said that, nor would they. But talking about him and kind of, saying he tries, he goes to mixers at Hillel House. He's doing his best, but it doesn't fit in with this world. And I think, Austin, that holy fool reference that's good. That's real good.
I mean, there's something interesting too that it's such a small little scene and such a small moment, and the character is so understated, but the woman that he's talking with at the lake during that Larry's talking with, like she never comes back again, right?
No.
Like that's the only scene, but she says something about tradition.
Yeah, she makes the point that like as Jews they have these stories, and in those stories are wisdom and tradition. So she kind of like gets Larry going down this path of seeking out that rabbinic wisdom.
But I also wonder this. It's so interesting because she says the Jewish tradition has this wisdom from which we can draw, but the wisdom itself oftentimes throws its hands in the air and says, well, let's just keep questioning. So it's almost like this endless reference to questioning and questioning and questioning, but not actually ever giving answers, even if the answer is to just keep questioning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, I think that probably is the most, I don't want to say optimistic, but positive reading of what's going on here with religion. That religion is primarily a way of asking questions and not a way of getting answers to those questions. And that's kind of why I said earlier, I think it is philosophically one of the Coen's most interesting movies, because it doesn't... I at least don't take away from it that life is meaningless. I take away that life is absurd, outside of our control, and looking for structural understanding is meaningless. But if anything, we learn to like ask the right questions and stay open to the fact that things might fall apart. Tommy, what are you thinking?
I think it's far more bleak because I mean
maybe I'm stretching. I don't know.
I mean, following sort of No Country for Old Men and Burn After Reading, where I mean, at the end of No Country for Old Men, Tommy Lee Jones is like, I give up. The God isn't here, and I'm just gonna go home. I mean, this movie feels super bleak. I mean, this is a guy looking for answers from God and getting nothing in return.
But see, that's what I think is so interesting. I almost weirdly think that this is like a love story to American conservative and reform Judaism, and like in the midst of middle class suburbanization kind of thing.
Well, that makes sense because it is their childhood.
It is their childhood.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the time they grew up. They found a neighborhood that looked like, I think they grew up in like St. Louis Park outside of it. It's like a neighborhood in Minneapolis that's historically Jewish. Like it really is an ode to that. So I think there's something to that, Austin.
Yeah, and it just like I get the bleakness and the absurdity, and I think you're both right in that. But I almost weirdly think that there's also kind of a weird appreciation and love for the fact that one of the things that the Jews have in the midst of all of this absurdity is precisely tradition. That's the thing that grounds them. And I think so many other particularly the American evangelical religious system does not have that, right? Like American Protestants think that you have the time of Jesus, and then they go to the time of Acts, and then they skip over medieval philosophy, medieval theology, the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. They skip over the Enlightenment, and they go to Luther and the Protestant Reformation. It's like there's no deep-seated connection to history. And then, of course, Christianity is supposed to be like the culmination of what the Jews misunderstood. So they again cut things off, right? But there isn't a flow that connects you to history, whereas the Jewish tradition is endless. And Job himself was not an Israelite. I mean, according to some rabbinic readings, he himself was from the land of Uz, I think. And so this is before exile, which means this is before the constitution of the Israelite people. So some people even refer to Job as being a quote unquote Gentile. He wasn't a part of the Jewish community, even though he still worships Yahweh. So there's something really interesting about this huge, massive tradition from which you can draw that goes all the way back to like fucking ancient Samaria and beyond, and that all of that connects together. And so it's a real like, we don't know the answers, we have no fucking clue, the universe is cosmically absurd, but we have this history that we can attach ourselves to, and that's adequate.
Wow. That was good. So I wonder then, and I don't want to, maybe we shouldn't go too far down this road, but the Coen brothers, these guys are filmmakers. They
know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing. And I think that, for me at least, it's hard to ever think about a Coen brothers film as detached from their films as a whole, thematically, stylistically, all that sort of stuff. So how do you all place this film, or how does the sort of broader Coen brothers extended universe affect the way you interpret this film from a storytelling and filmmaking point of view?
Yeah.
I mean,
Tommy, what you think?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it is the outlier in their filmography. I mean, it is the movie that is bridging their more sort of serious, I guess their more serious films, Miller's Crossing and, Fargo and those kind of movies, with the more sort of slapstick comedies. I mean, this is a tragic comedy. And so it's hard to even sort of I don't know where it's totally different than anything else they've done and they have done since. It's totally separate.
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing tonally, a little overlap with Inside Llewyn Davis, but it's such a different story. But it's another story about it's really bleak. But in Llewyn Davis, he kind of, I don't want to say he has it coming, but he does make some decisions, and they're not good. So yeah, Austin, what do you think about this in terms of the Coen brothers films?
I didn't even think about that connection with Llewyn Davis, which is one of my favorite of their films. I think tonally and in terms of pacing, absolutely. Like that's actually a really good kind of fit with it. But in terms of conceptually and everything else, I agree with Tommy. I think that this is a very strange film within their broader filmography. It's almost like they decided, you know how sometimes the joke is like, for like Soderbergh, for example, he's like, he'll do one for them and then one for me and then one for them and then one for me. Yeah. I feel like this is the film for them. Yeah. Totally. And not like that none of their other films are, but like this is like their, like you were just talking about, they grew up in this neighborhood. This is an ode to their childhood. This is 100% about us growing up in a conservative Jewish family. This is our experience. This is our unique view on the world, but then they're broadening it out to this larger tale within suburban America. But I think it's very much this is for us film, and because of that, that's why it is kind of an outlier.
Yeah, I mean, it even looks different than a standard. And I think Austin, was it you were mentioning the cinematographer?
Yeah,
Deakins.
Yeah, Roger Deakins.
Yeah. All right. What do we know about Deakins?
He's
well, he
good.
just did.
Yeah.
He did 1917.
He's new.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be talking about 1917 next week. He is also the cinematographer for that.
Oh my God, I truly didn't realize that. That's wow.
Yeah,
that would have been so great if we could have started next week by being like, we continue our exploration of the films of Deakins. But yeah, I mean, because
he's one of the most praised cinematographers. But this film is so strange because, like 1917, we don't want to talk about it too much, but it's shot like it's supposed to be a single take, and it's beautiful and epic in scope, and you can tell that it's like an art piece, a cinematic, visual, moving image art piece.
Which is
Whereas
the vibe you get from like
this,
but he makes the Minneapolis suburbs have this intensity to them. Like,
yeah, that's the thing. It's like this really
look.
subtle thing, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, don't you think? It's almost like the subtleness hits you constantly, so then it becomes more dramatic, but it's so understated. And I think that's what's so beautiful about it. And then I think people don't realize how hard it is to do that. Like, you don't just stick a camera at it, like framing
it's not a
and
filter
color
you add
palettes
after the fact on an app you get.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. Is everybody thinks they're a fucking photo editor now because of the filters, Instagram filters. You can't get like a Deakins style film just from the filters, people.
But it is so. And
you can't just fix it in post, man.
Other curious filmmaking question for y'all: does it mean anything that it's a cast of people they hadn't used before. And including the children weren't even actors. They did like these open auditions in the Midwest. So these weren't people they were pulling from the Hollywood system. So
yeah, I mean, most people in the movie weren't very well known when they made the movie, and I feel like that's a deliberate choice. Because I feel like, you know, when you cast Brad Pitt or you cast George Clooney, there's baggage there, and it's you're watching. Oh, it's George Clooney doing this movie. In this movie, Michael Stuhlbarg wasn't particularly well known at the time, and so I think there's a level of I put myself into that movie. I can project myself onto this everyman, and it allows sort of the viewers to sort of be in his mindset.
Because I think like Richard Kind is probably
Richard
when
Kind's
I first
the most
saw
famous
this,
person in the movie, probably. Yeah.
And shouts to Richard Kind. He's great. He's rarely the most famous person in a project. But I think you're right. And I think there's like a distance too where you make this point really well. If I'm watching Brad Pitt in something, we can go pretty deep and dark, but it's still Brad Pitt.
Yep.
When you don't know the actor, there's just a realness to it. And I think you get this emotional connection to them like as a real person because you've never like
you have no baggage.
The kid who plays Danny, I've never seen him before. I've never seen him since. That's who you are to me. You know, sorry. If you're listening to this, I hope it's going well. You're probably so much more successful than me, but but I think there's something interesting because the Coen brothers, you go through their films, they're double dipping all the time. We got a lot of Brolin. We're using Clooney multiple times. I mean, they like this. Goodman, Jesus. I won't go down the list.
I think with such a sort of simple story, I mean, there aren't a lot of like moves or dramatic beats in this that like are like, oh my God, what just happened? I think it's good that it doesn't have that sort of big name personality in the movie. It allows itself to be more grounded a little bit, but
doesn't it also make Larry's character weaker? Like you were saying, if it's Brad Pitt or George Clooney, we infuse the star power into them, and you're like, no matter how much you beat up Brad Pitt, he's still fucking gorgeous and built and whatever else and successful. Same with George Clooney, right? Whereas this guy, he can really play the character of the schlemiel, which is what he's doing. This ineffectual, kind of pushed around, someone who's just pulverized through the mundanity of the world, and then of course through the tragedies that befall him. And then you're like, oh fuck, man, he really is getting beaten. And his subtle emotional breakdown, where he doesn't have one of the moments like his brother does where he's running around screaming, even though you think that he could, he kind of still has a power and a strength through it all, even though he's broken, in the sense that he doesn't let himself just completely crumble. Maybe until the end, which is where it cuts out and we don't get to see the breakdown, but maybe that's it, you know?
And just to reward repeat listeners and tie in a little bit, I mean, this is something we saw when we talked about Uncut Gems, the use of actors who it was their first role, or they were unknowns, or they were just non-professional actors. It really adds something to the depth of that world and makes the performances more compelling. So, fun theme. Okay, before we sort of transition out of this formal discussion, what meat is left on the bone? Anything that y'all have wanted to say, thoughts we still have? I want to make sure everyone leaves today feeling like they left it all out on the field. That's a sports reference as a bunch of athletes. Anything else?
I have a question. Do you think that there's a larger commentary on just suburbia? I've mentioned this a couple of times, maybe obliquely, but like, do you think there's something intentional about how suburbia itself exacerbates the absurdity, the cosmic absurdity that we are thrown into?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that drives Larry crazy is that his neighbor is infringing on his lawn by a couple inches,
right?
And so it's like, this is my piece of heaven. How could you infringe on it? This sort of this implication that this little box of suburbia is somehow going to make your life perfect, which I think was sort of sold, and I think it's revealing these things to potentially not be as true and great as they seem.
Well, and what is suburbia if not this way of living life where you ignore every real problem in the world and act like it doesn't apply to you, right? Like I grew up in a suburb for most of my life, and like it was truly this little void of anything. Like there was no culture, but there wasn't really any crime, and we were all kind of the same homogenous thing. And I remember once, I think it was my mom tried to like paint her house or something, and the neighborhood community organization Gestapo were like no, and she had to like fill out forms and all the shit. And the people that are on the little internal Gestapo committees in the suburbs, they feed off that power so much because their life is fundamentally meaningless. So you would like find meaning and power. So yeah, I do think, Austin, that's a commentary in the suburbs. Anyone else is a suburbs person, and you're amongst company here. Or Tommy, are you a suburbs person, or did you grow up in an urban environment?
I grew up in a more urban environment.
So cool. So cool.
I'm
So cool,
I'm
bro.
so cool.
You're like so artsy, man.
Yeah, I'm seeing some stuff you're not seeing right now. But that's a good point. So
I live in like a suburban area now.
I mean,
so.
I will say
anyone
this.
who lives in LA doesn't get to be like, unless you live in like 4 blocks
if
of
you ever
downtown.
if you ever listen to like pop punk music is the music that emerged out of disaffected white boys that are suburban, right? Like, because it's all about the girl who, like, the problems that they have. It's not political, it's not social. Pop punk is all about like the girl or your friends or getting out of the town. That's the big thing, right? Less than Jake. Like, I swear it's the last time we're going to get out of this fucking town, right? That's it. It's Floridians and Californians and New Yorkers and whoever it is, all the suburban pop punk bands, it's all about like getting out of the town. And for me, as a boy that grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles, Los Angeles was like the place of truth, the place of reality. Like I was in a pop punk band, and our first EP, 17 years old, was called Life in the Bubble.
Guys, if you can find this online, we will pay you. So track down a copy. We will pay you.
So
this
like,
is on the record, $1,000 from Wisecrack's special bank account.
And the idea was, if we could get out of, if we actually even had a street marked on the 5 freeway. It's called Culver, which is in fucking Irvine, by the way, which is not even Los Angeles, but that's how South Orange County we were. We thought that if we could get on the freeway and drive north, once we got to Culver, then like the celestial city of the urban environment where depth and culture and real
the
people,
most sad
that was
Bruce
ahead of us.
Springsteen song I've ever heard. No, but you know what? I think the greater point you're making is that clearly Danny grows up to be a part of the burgeoning Minneapolis music scene in the 80s. We have like the Replacements and Husker Du and some of those other like early punk bands. So really, this is a love letter to the foundational elements of the Minneapolis music scene.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Everyone, please watch it if you haven't. I think, do we all recommend that our faithful listeners and viewers give this one a watch?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Multiple watches.
100%. Yeah. Everyone should watch it.
Great. So when you watch it, get in touch. And just a reminder for everyone, we truly love to hear from you. There's no exaggeration there. It's awesome. The people that listen to this podcast are the best. So you can email us at movies@wisecrack.co. Tommy, there's no M there.
Wow.
Just co.
That's confusing.
It is, but that's why I got to say multiple times. Movies@wisecrack.co. And you leave us a voicemail at 1-213-534-8807. That's 1-213-534-8807. Now that you know that, let's dip into the mailbag. Is that okay with everyone?
Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's if you were here when we talked about these movies, jump in. If you weren't, jump in. Okay, this is a team sport, like I said before. So we got an email from Greg, and this is about our Uncut Gems episode. Tommy, have you seen Uncut Gems?
I have seen Uncut Gems.
Then we're good to go.
Like it.
So he says this: bringing a Jewish perspective to it, uncut can mean non-new, i.e., uncircumcised. Circumcision is metaphorically in Judaism a way to curb appetite. So perhaps they are connecting it with Howard's drive for the thrill of gambling. It seems a stretch, but with how Jewish the Diamond District and this movie is, choosing to call it uncut seems intentional to me.
Do you think non-new was a typo and it was non-Jew?
Oh, it might be a typo.
So bringing a Jewish perspective to it, uncut can mean non-Jew.
I was
That
like,
is
wow,
uncircumcised.
non-new. Like, what is... Greg, I'm sorry.
And
if
it's a
that's on our
capital
end.
N, so you're like, the new.
Yeah, I was like, this is some stuff I don't even know about. Austin's going to explain it to us in a genealogical manner.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the point there is that if circumcision controls appetite, Howie doesn't have that. He's uncircumcised in his raw desire for gambling. I mean, it's a stretch, but it's an interesting point. But it's a stretch, and Greg acknowledges that it might be a stretch, so I feel like we can say that. Austin, any thoughts there?
So it's like he hasn't been incorporated into the symbolic order of Judaism yet, right? Mm-hmm. So he's just stuck with the drive, which is interesting. Okay, I'm gonna totally run with this for a second. But
Yes.
so like Zizek makes a distinction between desire and drives, and desire requires like an external object that induces that desire, right? Drive is just like the pure what we talked about, the pure kind of like pathological repetition or compulsion towards the thing. So maybe the point is that he is uncircumcised in that he hasn't been incorporated into the symbolic order, i.e. desire order, and so therefore he's still stuck within the drive and he's uncircumcised, and that's why he's a compulsive gambler. Boom.
Wow.
What do you think?
I think that longtime Show Me the Meaning listener, Slavoj Žižek, is someplace right now agreeing with this, and he's going to write a book in response to what you just said.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
But maybe
any thoughts on that one, Tommy?
There's no way I can top Austin's answer. So,
I know. I don't want to try.
Why do we even? Why even bother?
I know. I just.
But there is something about the uncut.
Okay,
Yeah.
Austin,
But there is
you're gonna
something
love
about the
this.
uncut.
Austin, I got an email that calls you out by name.
Oh.
This is also
Oh,
on
shit.
Uncut Gems. Okay, this is from Brandon. I was just listening to your Uncut Gems podcast, and a question came up regarding how shows are becoming more and more meta. In the discussion surrounding the question, Austin, that's you, made a comment about how there's a lack of honesty or fear of being genuine. While I totally see the point as it relates to more cynical media that uses meta references as a substitute for originality, is there not something to be said for the fact that as a creator, there is no more direct way to be honest through your work? Also, what does it say that we feel a sense of dishonesty from literally pulling back the curtain? Is it really honesty we're seeking? Or to the question of why is it becoming more popular, is it possible to say it's because audiences are attracted to the honesty and the feeling of connection that it creates between viewer and creator? Just some thoughts. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Brandon. Austin, you started this.
I feel pinned.
We can give it a go if you want to get your arsenal ready. I mean, I think there's an interesting point. Tommy, what do you think?
Well, is the argument that meta-ness is sincere? Is that what they're trying to get at, do you think? Or?
I think so. The idea that like by meta-ness, there's a reveal of what's really happening, so there is an honesty there.
But I think so much of filmmaking is about transporting you to a different world and sort of putting yourself into characters' positions and this empathy. And I think meta-ness takes you back. It makes you understand. You are always aware that you're watching a movie, and there's a level of distance to it. And so I don't find it to be truthful and honest. I do think it's insincere. I don't think being meta naturally equates to sincerity.
Yeah, and I think what you just said makes you think of the difference between being earnest and honest.
Yeah.
I think that the shows I like the most are ones that lean into earnestness. They might not be like honest in a literal sense, but it connects to your humanness. And I think sometimes the honesty of meta-ness is more thinky, more conceptual than it is something that you feel. Austin, what do you think?
Well, yeah, and a lot of times that meta-ness can also be manipulative and quite pedantic, right? It's like we know that there is nothing sincere that we can say, and we're going to constantly, endlessly reference the fact that we are so self-aware, and it can kind of be self-aggrandizing, right? But at the same time, there's also a certain meta-ness to like the whole Brechtian idea of creating that distancing effect, right? That shocks the audience to thought, that challenges your expectations. And when you can do that in a way that doesn't fall into just pure pedantic, I'm smarter than you and I'm going to beat you over the head with whatever this secret message is, it's kind of like a weird Gnosticism. If you can avoid that, then I think there is something powerful about the kind of like meta, distancing, Brechtian, whatever stuff. And then in that sense, I think Brendan's right that it does kind of create a connection to, if not to the author, to at least something that the author's signaling to.
I'm not. I don't think you're wrong, and I do think sometimes with the meta thing, there's times where I watch something and like The Good Place has been a show like this recently where it'll make certain meta moves. I don't think it's a meta show as such, but occasionally they make very meta moves that it does feel like a wink from the creators that are sort of like whether you're part of a certain community or you're consuming similar content. There's fun moments, and I think I like meta moments more than I like a meta show.
Yeah, I mean, in those cases, it's sort of bringing the audience into it. It's sort of creating a parallel and sort of connection between the audience and the creator, and so that is truthful. It's not so truthful when it's just pointing out, oh, this thing is dumb, or or undercutting the emotional sort of moment in the film.
Yeah, it's like when
that was why like Jared didn't like Cabin in the Woods because he thought it was just shitting on like the history of horror films and cinema, whereas I kind of thought it was clever. Right, so he didn't like it because he thought it was really cynical, but I liked it because I thought it was clever. So there's a fine line to walk there, and you could fall in either ditch. Yeah,
2 C words, Someone say a third one. I'm going to say a third one, which is Cats. Have either of you all seen Cats?
I have not seen Cats.
Austin, have you seen Cats?
I haven't either, so this is going to be all you.
No, it's fine. There's some cat stuff. We're not going to get deeply into it because I am someone who last week was
I know the musical.
trying to make sense of it. I was trying
I know,
so hard.
I know the live musical as a musical theater brat, so I've seen that and I've listened to the soundtrack a billion times, but I did not see the Hooper film.
I'll leave it at this right now. Max asks a really interesting and detailed question about cats. We might have to get to it another time whenever we all make sense of what cats really means, because that was a lot. I would suggest that neither of you watch Cats. Watch A Serious Man again, but maybe don't watch Cats. I'm going to ask both of you. This is unfair because I didn't tell you this was coming, but you have to answer quickly because this is live radio, baby, and we got to be quick. Favorite Coen Brothers movie?
Miller's Crossing and Raising Arizona.
Cool. I said one, you took two. I respect the fact that you do what you want.
Yeah, I'm gonna do what I want.
I like it.
One is drama, one is a comedy.
Okay, Austin, favorite Coen Brothers movie, and you can get two if you want.
Because I did it.
Yeah.
Big Lebowski, and then I love Llewyn Davis too, but Big Lebowski, 100%.
Wow. That's great. It was fun to hear that.
What's yours?
What about yours?
Yeah.
I'm going to go Lebowski for my fun one, and I'm going to go Serious Man for my dark one.
Okay.
I could go.
Wow.
I haven't gone back to the 90s films in a while, so I need to. I might change my mind, but having just watched it a couple times in the past week, I'm a Serious Man kind of guy.
You know a film that's criminally underrated? I think Hail Caesar was really good.
It is.
It was
It's
better
really
than we
good.
gave it credit for at the time.
I was thinking Barton Fink is highly underrated.
And those together, talking
those
about
are
a
good
double
sort of-
feature.
That's a good double feature.
Okay, so that's our big advice. Watch Serious Man and then do a Barton Fink, Hail Caesar double feature.
I think that's a good way to go.
You won't go wrong. And once again,
Michael,
yes?
do you want to know something crazy?
Why not?
The first time I saw Barton Fink in Miller's Crossing was with you and our friend John when we were in Scotland. Because he introduced me to both. Do you remember that?
Austin, we've talked about this. You do not let them know that we know each other on this podcast. We had this discussion. I know you only as a disembodied voice that knows a lot of facts. Okay, listener, don't worry. He's. I don't know what drugs they do in Australia, but he's doing them. He has his own.
Well, I had a dream
Mike Fagel
that
out
I
there.
watched. That I watched Miller's Crossing and Barton Fink, but that was the first time that I ever saw it. Was actually so you have like whether it's imaginary or not, you have some sort of impact on my experience of the Coen Brothers filmography.
Wow. Well, that's good to know. It's good. And yeah, I was kidding. I'm proud to have known and continue to know Austin. But on that note, I think we're done. All we can wish is that our listeners and viewers never have a Cy Abelman in their own life.
Yep.
But Tommy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Austin, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
And then listeners and viewers, thank you so much. We love having you around. Please subscribe, leave some comments, leave some good reviews. We got some good content coming out soon, including a video that is on the Coen Brothers. Sorry to wet some whistles, but that's coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. And in the meantime, this has been Show Me the Meaning, Wisecrack's Movie Podcast. We will see you all next time. Have a good one.